Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Hour of Devastation spoilers. And we're reaching the end of Hour of Devastation preview season. Tomorrow the full spoiler comes out, so today we have our last crazy stuff. We have a couple of mythics, some sweet rares, a bunch of commons and uncommons, a ton to talk about, so we better jump right into it with mythic number 1, Majestic Matriarch, and this is one of the more unique and potentially powerful mythics we've seen in a while. So it's 5 mana, you get a star. Its power and toughness is equal to the twice the number of creatures you control. So if it's just Majestic Matriarch, it's a 2/2. If you have 2 other creatures, it'll be a 6/6 for 5. If you have 4 other creatures, a 10/10 for 5. And then at the beginning of each combat, it basically gets any keyword abilities that you have on at least one other creature. I think there's some left off, but for the most part, any common current keyword ability, Majestic Matriarch gets as well. So in some ways, this is reminiscent of Odric Lunarch Marshal. It does a similar thing. Odric gives all of your creatures the keyword mechanics or abilities that one of your creatures has. Majestic Matriarch does the same thing, but only for itself. So I think this card is actually really powerful. The question is, it's kind of directly competing with Verdurous Gearhulk, but I think these cards kind of do different things. So Verdurous Gearhulk can be a vanilla 8/8 trample for 5 mana. Majestic Matriarch is going to be a 8/8 if you have at least 3 other creatures, which hopefully you will have. Verdurous Gearhulk is definitely better on an empty board, but Verdurous Gearhulk doesn't have all these crazy keyword abilities, which can do some really insane stuff. So I think there's a couple of possibilities for Majestic Matriarch. Number 1 is to play it in a token deck, and I think here, its massive size can make it even better than Verdurous Gearhulk. It doesn't have the upside of coming down with pseudo haste by dumping counters on something, but if you play like a Servo Exhibition on turn 2, a Nissa on turn 3, start making tokens, maybe a Sram's Expertise, you can easily have a 12/12, a 14/14, even a 20/20 by the time Majestic Matriarch comes down, and that is just a massive creature for its mana cost. It is so big, and if you can throw in just a hint of a keyword, something with trample, something with flying, it's a super scary threat. The other thing you can do with Majestic Matriarch is really try to take advantage of the keyword ability. There's some really crazy curves. I mean, for example, let's say you play random 1-drop, random 2-drop, maybe a token maker to get a couple creatures. If you could do that, and then on turn 3 play Solemn Recruit, on turn 4 play Gold Knight Castigator, Majestic Matriarch can easily be a 10/10 flying haste double strike coming down on turn 5. That just closes out the game on the spot. So I think this card is powerful enough that people are going to build around it because it offers an insane potential for just stealing games out of nowhere. There's limited instant speed removal that's actually going to deal with it. I think this is going to see play in standard. I think some decks will still prefer Verdurous Gearhulk if you're working with +1/+1 counter synergies and stuff like that, but there are going to be decks, I believe, that look to take advantage of just this absolutely nut curve. You don't even have to do anything crazy. I mean, yes, Gold Knight Castigator, kind of fringe, Solemn Recruit, kind of fringe. I'm sure there's other things with the keywords that you can make work as well, maybe better creatures to make it work, but there's a very realistic possibility with some combination of double strike, haste, flying, or trample that you can just close out the game on turn 5 out of nowhere with the Majestic Matriarch. So I think this card is actually super powerful, and I'm really excited to see what it can do in standard. Our next mythic, and last mythic that we haven't seen yet of Hour of Devastation, is Crested Sunmare, and this card is absurd in more ways than one. First, it's like a pseudo horse lord, a 5/5 for 5, makes your other horses indestructible. It's not legendary, so if you can get 2 of them down, you have them making each other indestructible, which avoids a lot of removal. And then at the beginning of each end step, if you gained life, any amount of life each turn, you get a 5/5 white horse creature token. And the big thing here, and I missed this on my first read through of the card, it's each end step. So if you gain life on your turn and play a Crested Sunmare, you immediately are getting 10 power and toughness for 5 mana, which is a great deal split across 2 bodies. It's like a better Armada Worm. And then the upside is, if you gain life during your opponent's turn, you get another 5/5. If you're playing Commander and you can play something that continually gains you life on each player's turn, then you're going to just build a whole army of indestructible horses. So I think the easiest comparison for this to make is Wingmate Rock. It's a 5-drop white thing. Crested Sunmare doesn't have evasion, but it makes bigger things. It potentially makes a token when it comes into play, involves lifelink. It's not a great comparison, but I see this as similar, and I think Crested Sunmare has a lot of potential just because it makes so much power and toughness for its mana cost, being the top end of a white deck or some sort of multicolor mid-range deck that can gain life. The challenge is, how are we going to gain life in Standard? I think the easiest thing to do is just to play it with lifelink. That's the simplest way. You don't really got to build around it. There's good things with lifelink already. Sacred Cat, Gisela, Glorybound Initiate, and then just plan on attacking with one of these creatures, gaining life, playing Crested Sunmare. As long as your opponent can't immediately kill it before you go to your end step, you're at least getting the 5/5, and then it's like this crazy white Broodmade Dragon thing, and it's very much worth its mana cost. The other possibility is to go really deep and try to gain life on your opponent's turn as well, so you're making 2 5/5s, and I think this is the jankier but more fun option, so I'm excited to try this, but I don't expect that the competitive decks with Crested Sunmare will be going too deep on trying to gain life. I think you're just hoping to gain life here and there, get a couple horses out of it, and it's way worth the deal. But you can play like Aetherflux Reservoir. You can cast Crested Sunmare during your turn, gains you life, gets the horse, cast an instant during your opponent's turn, gain a life, get another horse. You're just making tons of horses. Peace of Mind lets you discard cards at instant speed, so you can do it your turn, your opponent's turn, to gain life, get more horses. Luxa River Shrine, same thing. So I think this is probably something that's more likely in Commander, where it will fit in a dedicated life gain deck. Maybe like Aloro. Life gain is a popular sub-theme, so I think in Standard, you play it and hope to get one horse out of it. Maybe if you're lucky, 2 horses out of it if your opponent can't deal with it, and that's all you really need. 10, 15 power for 5 mana by attacking with a lifelink creature is absurd. I think this card is super strong. And then in Commander, you're more likely to build around it in a way where you're trying to make a ton of indestructible horses to really go off. So I think we got 2 really powerful mythics to close out the spoiler, and I really think the 2 we saw today are going to be among the most constructed, at least Standard playable, of all the mythics that we saw in Hour of Devastation. They're just very pushed for what they do. Thankfully, they're 5 mana, so you're not going to see them just dominate the format like a Lotus Cobra or a Voice of Resurgence, but I definitely expect both to show up in Standard decks because they do a lot for your 5 mana investment. Moving on to the rares, we get a couple of interesting things. Leave to Chance is a really unique card. 2 mana, you get to bounce any number of target permanents. Worth noting that includes lands, which is kind of interesting. Usually it's non-land permanents. And then, with Chance, you can discard all your cards and get new cards. So in the late game, you can pick up a bunch of extra lands that you don't need, wheel them away, windfall them away, to get new cards, hopefully some non-land cards. I think as far as seeing Standard play, I'm most excited to use this in the Aetherflux Reservoir combo deck. So it's kind of a pseudo-paradoxical outcome. It doesn't draw us the cards that Paradoxical Outcome does, but it's a way we can pick up all of our bone saws, all of our cheap artifacts, replay them, generate more storm count for Aetherflux Reservoir, and the wheel effect is actually kind of nice, because sometimes we get in a position where we don't really need the lands that we have in the Paradoxical Outcome Aetherflux Reservoir deck, so being able to pick those up, replay all our 0 mana stuff, and then wheel away all of the extra lands we don't need to hopefully find more 0 mana cards. So I think this slots right into some sort of Jeskai build of Aetherflux Reservoir combo. Otherwise, I don't really know if this sees play. We have, like, Eerie Interlude, which exiles our creatures. If you want to avoid wraths, that's a more efficient way of doing it. It's only 1 more mana. So I think you're looking for specific combo builds where you're bouncing your own stuff for value, but it's going to be super good when you do that, and it's very efficiently costed for what it does. I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't know what it is off the top of my head, that we even see this synergy work out in Modern to some extent in some sort of combo deck. Obviously, Pure Steel Paladin combo could take advantage of it. I don't know if they will or not because they got retracked, but you definitely could use it because it's a way you can save your Pure Steel from removal while also bouncing all of your 0-mana stuff to replay it when you're not protecting your Pure Steel Paladin. We've seen that deck playing self-bounce stuff just to protect the Paladin, and this seems like it's way better because it can be a combo piece or a Pure Steel Paladin saver. So I'm really excited for the combo potential of this card, basically because of the leave half, and then the chance half is just weird upside that might come into play in certain situations. Next up, we have Abandoned Sarcophagus, which is a new Cycling Matters card, and it's a really interesting one. It lets you cast non-land cards with cycling from your graveyard, but then whenever a cycling card goes into your graveyard, if it wasn't cycled, you got to exile this. So you can play this, recast your cycling cards, but if you recast a creature with cycling and it dies, then it gets exiled. Or if you cast a censor to counter something, then the censor is going to get exiled. Just where this fits, I'm not sure. It definitely has a lot of potential because it allows you to cycle your censor, your Archfiend of Ifnir, your Renewed Faith in the early game for value to dig through your deck, find more of what you need, and then in the late game, you have a censor in your graveyard you can cast. You can cast your Archfiend of Ifnir, you can cast your Renewed Faith to gain some life. So it gives you this free ability to just willy-nilly cycle all of your stuff in the early game and still be able to take advantage of it in the late game. It could also bring about a new build of New Perspectives. So far, we've seen New Perspectives be this crazy combo card, is the only way it's really been used, but it's possible we could have a New Perspectives control build now where we want to cycle through our deck, draw a bunch of cards, and then just cast our big cycling threats from the graveyard. We'll have a ton of censors to protect our stuff, we'll have removal spells like cast out in the graveyard, and just play like 100% from our graveyard with Abandoned Sarcophagus. The downside is Wizards did print a bunch of good graveyard hate, which makes this plan risky and hopefully keeps this card in check a little bit, but I think it has enough power that in a certain build it could be very strong, kind of like how we've seen New Perspectives. Normally it's not good, but in a very specific deck it's an all-star. I think Abandoned Sarcophagus is the same way, with the risk of just getting blown out by Crook of Condemnation, Scavenger Grounds, Watchers of the Dead, something like that. Next up, we have Hour of Devastation, and this is just a big red board wipe with a bit of upside. 5 mana, 5 damage to all creatures and all non-bolus planeswalkers, plus creatures lose indestructible. So the big question is this going to be better than Sweltering Suns? And it really depends on what the meta looks like. Against aggro, you definitely want Sweltering Suns because Hour of Devastation is going to be slow. But if there's a lot of stuff in the format that's 4 toughness, 5 toughness, then I think Hour of Devastation is a big consideration as a 1-of or a 2-of, just as a creature sweeper. Plus, there's certain specific card types that, if they're very good, make Hour of Devastation way better. So if everyone's playing Gods, the fact that it makes those creatures lose indestructible will make Hour of Devastation super key for control decks, because a deck like Red-White Control really struggles with a God once they hit the table if you can slide it through a counter spell. So if Gods are really heavily played, Hour of Devastation gets even better. Also, if Planeswalkers are seeing a lot of play, it's a nice catch-all for a control deck to be able to wipe out Chandras and Gideons and Lilianas and all that kind of stuff. So I think the card is powerful enough to see standard play. 5 damage to everything for 5 mana is a pretty decent rate. But I think whether or not you play over Sweltering Suns mostly depends on what the metagame looks like, and we don't really know right now what it looks like. Right now we're still struggling with vehicles being heavily played. Hour Devastation doesn't help there, so we'll have to see what the metagame looks like, but definitely a good sweeper to keep in mind for the next 18 months of standard moving forward. We also have Kefnet's Last Word, which is literally our last word of the day as far as rares are concerned. And this is the most disappointing of your lands don't untap cycle. It's a slightly upgraded Mind Control, a little bit cheaper, a slightly maybe upgraded Confiscation Coup. I don't even know if it's better than Confiscation Coup. Basically, instead of just hitting creatures, it gets creatures, artifacts, or enchantments. It doesn't have any restriction like energy or anything like that. The downside is you skip your whole entire next turn. I think this card is basically standard unplayable, and I think for me it's the most disappointing of the cycle because I was really hoping the blue one would do something unique and cool. Take an extra turn, skip your next untap step, that type of effect, but instead we just get another Mind Control with some very slight upgrades. Hitting enchantments isn't even that much of an upgrade in standard standard. Like, yeah, maybe you get a Fevered Visions once in a while, but there's not that many enchantments that are seeing play, and stealing a cast out doesn't do anything. So I'm pretty disappointed with this one. It's probably pretty good in limited. Mind control effects usually are good in limited. We'll have to see how painful skipping a turn is. Usually less painful in limited, as weird as that sounds, because your opponent's less likely to be able to play a whole bunch of efficient threats and overwhelm you while you're not untapping. So it'll probably be good there, but as far as constructed, super disappointed in Kefnet's last word. Into the land of commons and uncommons, a couple interesting ones, then a bunch of limited fodder. Bloodwater Entity is actually pretty sweet. A 2/2 flying with prowess is already good, and getting an instant or sorcery, even though it's going back to the top of your graveyard instead of your hand for kind of combo purposes, is still a pretty sweet ability. You can cycle an illumination, hieroglyphic illumination in the early game, then put it back on top and draw cards with it later. Just getting back any powerful instant or sorcery is pretty good, and a 2/2 flying prowess for 3 mana fits right into Spells Matter type deck. So I'm excited for this to be another piece of the Enigma Drake, Bedlam Reveler type deck that seems really close to being good, but isn't quite there yet. And then Oblidi Oblida, Life Goes On, is a super efficient life gain spell. I don't think it would ever see main deck play. I've heard Pauper people being pretty excited about the potential of this showing up in sideboards. If you can gain 8 life for 1 mana, it's about as efficient as it gets, so it's a good way to hose on burn decks, other aggressive decks. We see Feed the Clan, which is kind of a similar rate, but for 2 mana instead of 1, you gain 4, or with Ferocious, you gain 8. It'd be playable all the way back to Modern as a hoser for aggressive matchups. So I think that this will show up in sideboards, specifically to fight those decks, in Standard, in Modern, in Pauper. Otherwise, just a ton of limited fodder. Nothing really to see here for Constructed. Some semi-interesting stuff. Lots of flavor stuff. We see Tragic Lessons with some of the gods dying. So, I don't know. God's Pharaoh Faithful could be the greatest of the Soul Sisters, except it doesn't trigger on white creatures, and Soul Sister decks are normally white. It's going to be really hard to take advantage of it. So, I don't know. Just a bunch of stuff that you'll play in limited. Maybe there's some really weird thing where it shows up as a one-of in a constructed deck, but none of these cards seem likely to have a constructed impact. Anyway, that's been our daily Hour of Devastation spoilers for today. So what do you think? How broken is Majestic Matriarch and Crested Sunmare? Those cards seem insane to me. What do you think about them? Leave to chance. Is it just a combo piece? Is it going to push Aetherflux Reservoir up to the top of the format? What about Abandoned Sarcophagus? Where does that fit in the format? Does that make cycling decks significantly better, or is it too slow? What do you think about that? Any of the commons and uncommons that we didn't really go in depth about? Is there anything you like for specific decks? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.